Hello, hello, hello. Thank you. You may be seated. I thought I'd just milk it. I don't know when's the next time I'll get an applause for standing up. So I appreciate that tonight. Well, it's great to see you. Have you had a good week, everybody? Yes. Well, I have been here through the week and did a bit of shopping, boosting the Singapore economy. But I noticed something about the Singapore people that I think we need to talk about. And that is that the Singapore people are maybe obsessed with being tidy. Because when I went into the shops and ruffled a pile, picked up a t-shirt and unfolded it to look at it, these ladies followed me round, and the moment I put it down, they folded it back up and put the pile back perfectly. And I did it in every shop I was in and picked something up. People followed me around and tidied it the moment I walked away from it. And I got to be honest, it gave me a bit of a bad attitude. So I deliberately went around untidying things in the shop. Maybe it affected their feng shui. Maybe they had OCD. But I tonight would like to start an anti-tidiness revolution. Maybe you could all go into the shops this week and just mess things up a little bit. And just mess with the Singapore tidiness thing. Maybe we'll get free of that OCD thing and just have an anti-tidiness campaign. I'll become the leader, online, because I won't be here. And maybe it'll help people because some things are better just left untidy. I've done tidy church and I've done untidy church. I've done tidy family with my kids. And then I thought, you know what, let's just let it be untidy for a while. And there's a lot to be said for both. But maybe you need to lean more to the untidy this week. I dare you to untidy a thing in the shop and just walk away. I dare you this week. That will be your challenge. Well, I'm glad I'm not speaking next week with 25 services. Pastor Phil can do that. Thank you, Jesus. I will be book signing afterwards. If you want a book signing, I will see you there. I have resources here, as many of you know, and these two new ones in particular, this new USB called Soar With Your Strength, I'll speak a little bit about that tonight, is out there for sale. Not many of these left, but this is just out this last week. This became available. Just really a number of messages to help you grow as a person, to find out what your strength is and how to become brilliant at that. And I'll speak about that a little bit more tonight. And this latest resource called Wisdom for Life is not preaching. It is about 65 to 8-minute sound bites of wisdom on various things that I wish someone had talked to me about when I was younger as a person and in ministry. Things about health and relationships and finances and leadership and communication. Just stuff that I believe is just solid wisdom for life stuff for you, someone you know. Again, not many of these left, so grab those and beat the Sunday morning crowd to that. You got first approach to that tonight. So resource and invest in yourself. Y'all okay? Well, I'm going to speak to you tonight and start by reading from a book that I stumbled into in the late 90s. In the late 90s, about 1997, as some of you may know from tracking our journey as a church, and one of the books I think that is here, called Crossing Over. Crossing Over is the story of the reinvention of our church, which by that time was about 25 years old. And by all accounts, a successful church. We had grown to about 600 people, which I promise you for England is a mega church. And we'd planted about 15 churches. And so we had our own building that we'd built, and we were doing really well. And I've talked to you about this before in my earlier visits, before any of you knew anything about our history as a church. But by the mid to late 90s, I realized that generationally we were settling and that we were turning inward and becoming comfortable. The problem was that no one seemed to recognize that. And the problem also was that I was part of creating that problem. One of the reasons why many churches do not reinvent and re-engineer themselves is that the leaders often lack the courage to change things that they themselves set in motion. Because all of us in what we do in life learn more as we go along, and as we look back, we often say, I wish I had known then what I know now, and of course that's impossible. But as we grow and learn more, we have to have the courage internally in ourselves, and corporately as the church, we have to have courage to reinvent and re-engineer. It's best to do it in small incremental steps rather than huge things at once. And our church had not done that. So in the late 90s, we had a major reinvention. I called it crossing over, based on the idea that God gave me a language to articulate it and explain it to the church of God, saying to Joshua, I want you to cross over from one side of the Jordan to the other. And that crossing over of the Jordan represented a complete new beginning, a new leadership style under Joshua, a new lifestyle for the people. The cloud disappeared and the pillar of fire by night disappeared. They were all gone. Even the way they were going to hear from God was going to change. And so it was a radical time for those people. And of course, as you know, many of them struggled to reinvent and re-engineer. A whole generation died in the wilderness because though they were out of Egypt, Egypt was not out of them. And they were free, but they continued to have a slave mentality, which caused them to miss their destiny. Many people and many churches can be summed up in the same journey that the children of Israel had from Egypt to the promised land. And 25 years in, which is roughly a generation, we were settling. And so I was very open to new ideas about what it was that was causing us to settle. What are the things I should be talking to the church about to help us to move into our promised land, as it were? And I trained myself by this time to grab a book based on the title on the cover. I advise you to do that. The worst thing that can happen is you waste $20, you know, or even less online. In those days, books were not online and downloadable. You had to buy them and you know, have them in your hand. We didn't have the electronic e-books that we have now. So I saw a book moving through an airport in Chicago. I saw a book, and the title of the book was called Soar with Your Strength. And I just read the back of the cover, and I figured something in the explanation of the book would be helpful to me to read. You know, I've read a lot of books, and I've just got one thought out of one paragraph in the book, and the rest of the book was rubbish. But that one paragraph in my hands as a communicator became a 4 or 5 week series and fed people for a long time from that one crumb that the writer of the book probably thought was the least significant thing in the book. That one crumb in the book became a feast to me and through me to God's people. Because the significance of a book is not the book itself, it's the timing with which you read the book. That's why sometimes people recommend a book to you and you read the book and you think, why did they recommend that book to me? That book was rubbish. I got nothing out of that at all. It's because when you read the book, you were not looking for the same things that the person was who recommended the book to you. And so really what we are more accurate to say is that you didn't read the book, but the book read you. That's the significance of a book, a word, a thought, a seeing something, a hearing something in its time. Revelation is not truth. Revelation is truth in its time. And so this book became like that for me. It's a secular book. It was written by business people, but it had some wisdom in it that helped me to have a new understanding about how to help people grow. I'm going to read to you from the opening chapter of the book because it sets out by telling an imaginary parable to set up the thinking that becomes the core of what the book is about. So if the children are sitting comfortably, I will read to you your only bedtime story you will get tonight. So are you all comfortable? If you're naughty, I will not read anymore. So listen up, children, and pay attention, and all shall be well. Imagine there is a meadow. In that meadow there is a duck, a fish, an eagle, an owl, a squirrel, and a rabbit. They decide they want to have a school so they can be smart, just like the people. With the help of some grown-up animals, they come up with a curriculum they believe will make a well-rounded animal. Running, swimming, tree climbing, jumping, and flying. On the first day of school, the little rabbit combed his ears back and went hopping off to school straight to the running class. There he was an absolute star. He ran to the top of the hill and back as fast as he could, and oh, did it feel good. He said to himself, I can't believe it. At school I get to do what I do best. The instructor said, Rabbit, you really have a talent for running. You have great muscles in your rear legs. With some training, you will get more out of every hop. The rabbit said, I love school. I get to do what I like to do, and I get to learn to do it even better. The next class was swimming. When the rabbit smelt the chlorine in the water, he said, whoa, hang on, rabbits don't like to swim. The instructor said, well, you may not like it now, but in 5 years from now, you know it was good for you to learn. In the tree climbing class, a trunk was set at a 30-degree angle, so all the animals had a chance to succeed. The little rabbit tried so hard, but hurt his legs. In jumping class, the rabbit got along just fine. In flying class, he had a problem. So the teacher gave him a psychological test and discovered he belonged in the remedial flying group. In the remedial flying class, the rabbit had to practice jumping off a cliff. They told him, if you just work hard enough, you'll succeed. The next morning, he went on to swimming class. The instructor said, today, we all jump in the water. Whoa, hang on. I talked to my parents about swimming. They didn't learn to swim either. We don't like to get wet. I'd like to drop this particular class. The instructor said, you can't drop it. The add in and drop out period is over. And at this point, you have a choice. Either jump in or you fail this class altogether. So the rabbit jumped in. He panicked. He went down once, he went down twice, and 3 times bubbles came up. The instructor saw he was drowning and pulled him out. The other animals had never seen anything quite as funny as this wet rabbit who looked more like a rat without a tail. So they chirped and jumped and barked and laughed at the rabbit. The rabbit was more humiliated than he'd ever been in his life. He wanted desperately to get out of class that day. He was glad when it was all over. He thought he would go home and his parents would understand and help him. When he arrived, he said to his parents, I don't like school, I just want to be free. If the rabbits are going to get ahead, you have to get a diploma, replied his parents. The rabbit said, but I don't want a diploma. His parents said, well, you're going to get a diploma whether you want one or not. They argued, and finally the parents made the rabbit go to bed. In the morning, the rabbit headed off to school slowly. Then he remembered that the principal had said, anytime you have a problem, remember my door is always open. When he arrived at school, he hopped up in the chair by the counselor and said, I don't like school. The counselor said, tell me about it. So he did. The counselor said, Rabbit, I hear you. I hear you saying you don't like school because you don't like swimming. I think I've diagnosed that correctly. Rabbit, I'll tell you what we'll do. You're doing fine in running. I don't know why you need to work on running. What you need to work on is swimming. I'll arrange it so you don't have to go running anymore. You can have extra periods of swimming. When the rabbit heard this, he just threw up. As the rabbit hopped out of the counselor's office, he looked up and saw his old friend, the wise owl, who cocked his head and said, little rabbit, life doesn't have to be this way. We could have schools and we could have businesses where people are allowed to concentrate on what they do well. The little rabbit was so inspired at that thought. He said, when I graduate, I want to start a business where the rabbits would do nothing but run. The squirrels would just climb in and the fish would just swim and the birds just fly. As he disappeared into the meadow, he sighed softly to himself, oh, what a wonderful place that would be. Of course, it's a parable, and within that parable are metaphors for you and for me. For many, many people, multiplied millions of people around the world feel exactly like that rabbit feels about how life tries to make them be something that God never intended them to be. The idea of this book, Soar with Your Strength, is that God made everybody brilliant at something. You know, every child is born a genius. The problem is the day you were born was your last day of freedom. It's the last day God had you all to himself. And after you were born, he entrusted you to the care of your family or the care of those that took care of you and nurtured you. He entrusted you to people, many of whom had an alternative idea for how you should develop as a person. Even to the point where you finished up going into studies and taking jobs that you hate because you allowed people to, even though you were a rabbit, make you try to become good at swimming. And every one of you in here and those listening online, God made you before you were even born. When God created you in your mother's womb, God sent you here loaded up with genius and brilliance that's distinctive to you. And what we have to do in life, and I believe part of the responsibility hugely for the church, and this is why I wanted a new thinking about God's people in the late 90s, because 25 years in of my ministry, I was concerned why intelligent people who loved God, were saved, baptized in the Spirit, living blessed lives, seemed so unable to flourish as people. I was concerned why the same people week in, week out came for prayer and counsel as if nothing we were saying was able to make a difference and an impact on the things that they were struggling with as a person. I felt that many of them had turned the church into a codependent relationship where they were now leaning on us like a crutch to counsel them and to feed them and to coach them and to hold their hand through weakness, rather than realizing life is not lived from the outside in. Life is lived from the inside out. And yet what we spend much of our time doing in life as we age is we try to change and control our external environment rather than spend time changing and controlling the internal climate of our internal world. And what we do if we're not careful is we create an Old Testament church in a New Testament era where we think that God somehow is out there and God is going to come and touch us, and we have to kind of access him and we have to get him to come to us, and we use the language as if God is out there separate to me and I have to get him to come to me or get something from him. Whereas the truth is, God is not out there somewhere. God lives inside you. It is the greatest joy of a new covenant believer to not have to go to a tabernacle or go to a temple or climb a mountain to encounter God. The Old Testament saints would think they died and gone to heaven to be in this room today. To have the Holy Spirit living internally, to not have the law written on the tablets of stone, but to have God's will written on the tablets, as it were, of your heart. To know that God has made you his eternal home, that God is not treating you like a hotel or a holiday vacation rental, that God is not renting you, he is not in you tonight and then he checks out on Monday morning and then he re-enters you next Sunday. That God lives in you. God has come to make his home in you. He's not living in the front porch. He's not using a key to get in every week. He lives inside you. And I believe that much of the New Testament church, which has been the church for 2,000 years, still has this thinking that life gets better when we try to control our external environment. And there are many things going on in your life tonight that you cannot control. And I promise you, the things you cannot control are the things God is most using to shape your internal world. And this made me think about the best way for me to grow and the best way for me to help God's people to grow. Because the Bible says in Psalm 92 and verse 12, that planted in the house, they shall flourish. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Verse 13, planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish. I believe that we have a crisis, what I call a crisis of human flourishing. And it's to do with what I read from that book in the first place. We have a crisis of human flourishing because we don't understand what flourishing means. You know, flourishing doesn't just mean you're saved or that you're in a great church or that you're filled with the Spirit. I know many Spirit-filled believers that are not flourishing as people. And so we've got to be open to a new idea that just because we love God and God loves us and He lives inside you and you're in a great church and you're filled with the Spirit and so on, that does not equal flourishing, because there's more to you than that. You are much more complex of a person than that. And so we can't read Psalm 92 and assume what it's saying is that attending church they will flourish. Planted in the house does not mean attending meetings. That's a part, but it is certainly not the main part. Planted in the house means that you are rooted in a value system. You are rooted in God's way of thinking. You are rooted in the complexity of the nature and the life of God. You are hooked up through your roots directly into a relationship internally with God. And of course, being in church and celebrating like we are tonight and doing what we're doing is a part of that. But this is only a small part of your week. If this is all we have through which to flourish, it's too small. 2 hours a week isn't enough. So being planted in the house, yes, this 2 hours a week is a part of that. But being planted in the house is being planted in the soil of how God thinks. Planted in a deep, ever-deepening relationship with God who lives inside you, doesn't live outside of you. When you came here tonight, you know, there was no presence of God in this room till you arrived. You brought that presence with you, because you carry the presence of God with you. No more than we enter that presence do you leave that presence. You don't leave God's presence when you leave this building tonight. He abides within you. You will never ever be away from, you will never be out of the presence of God, because He lives inside you. This is what I mean by we have this New Testament revelation and doctrine, but our language often is more familiar with an Old Testament believer's experience. And I realized that many of God's people were languishing and were not flourishing, because it's something to do with this issue that I'm addressing tonight. You know, to flourish means to grow vigorously. To flourish means to thrive. It means to grow luxuriantly. It means to be in one's prime. Now, when I look at those words the dictionary defines as what flourish means, I therefore don't think we can say that just being a Christian and being saved equals to that. So we have to dig deeper, and we have to become students. And every parent in here of your children that you're raising, it is a great privilege to be a parent. And the young people in here are going to love this message tonight. Your parents maybe not so much as I developed this, but you know, you have to figure that out later. I wish someone had told me what I am telling you teenagers in here tonight when I was a teenager. And maybe your parents would say the same thing as you listen to what I'm saying to you tonight, that we have a crisis of human flourishing because human resources are like natural resources. Natural resources are buried deep in the earth. They are difficult and expensive to access. So are human resources. Human resources are buried deep inside you, and they are also complex and expensive and require sustained, persistent, enduring effort to tap into them constantly as a way of life. I believe often we've built Christianity at a very surface level, and we have treated people as a very shallow level. And we have not taught people that the best way to grow as a person is to continue to grow internally, to dig deep down inside and find out what it is that God has graced and gifted you with in every single way. And we need to create an environment in the church, a culture, a climate, a context, an environment where you are permitted, if you are a rabbit, you are permitted all day, every day, just to run. But instead, we want to make you an all-rounded person. So we want you to learn to swim and fly as well. Even though God made you to be a rabbit, we expect you to swim. Because swimming should be another skill that you have. Because, you know, you got to do a bit of that fish stuff, even though you're a rabbit. When you be an all-rounded person, you got to get a diploma, whether you want one or not, in swimming. And I think our whole education system, therefore, is rigged against us flourishing. And I've done a lot of thinking and studying on this in recent years, and I've become convinced that we need a revolution. And there is a revolution going on. It's small, it is more developed in some parts of the world than others. And by the way, this is not an anti-education message tonight. Just in case the parents are panicking already. Education's great. I believe in education. My issue is not education. My issue is that education, the education system, is very often too narrow in its perception of how to help people flourish. Our education system is obsessed with fixing weakness rather than helping you get better at what God made you good at. One of the things in the book, which you'll like this, talks about the American table tennis team were determined in the Beijing Olympics to beat the Chinese table tennis team. They hadn't beaten them ever. And it was their greatest desire and ambition to beat the Chinese table tennis team. Well, the Beijing Olympics came and went, as some of you may remember, and the Chinese beat them easily. And the Americans were so demoralized that the American coaches spoke to the Chinese coaches and said, "What is it that we're missing? What are your techniques that are different to ours? Because we don't seem to be able to beat you for all our studying of you, for all our watching of you on video before we come." And the Chinese coaches said, it's simple. If our player has an awesome forehand, but a weak backhand, we spend no time developing his backhand. We spend all our time making his forehand, which is awesome, even more devastating. What you do in the West is, if your player's got a great forehand, but a weak backhand, you spend time trying to make his backhand as good as his forehand. And our philosophy is this: we know that if you know our player has got a weak backhand, we know you'll try to play to his backhand, and we know he'll lose a few points on his backhand. But we don't care, because we know he's going to kill you with his forehand. In other words, their philosophy was, let's not spend time trying to make a rabbit swim. Let's spend time making that forehand that's obviously already a killing machine. Let's spend time to make it so devastating that even if you think you've got him nailed by going to the backhand, he's going to concede a few points and he's not going to panic, because he knows you ain't seen nothing yet. I believe that the philosophy of that book revolutionized the way I thought about me and the way I thought about God's people. Because I believe in the church, we had rabbits swimming and flying all over the place. Then we wondered why people were struggling to grow. And they were loyal and committed, and loyal and committed people are willing to help you with things that they're not good at because they know you need a hand. But eventually, people get frustrated and get exhausted and get burnt out and frustrated and resentful when we keep asking rabbits to fly, instead of building an understanding in us that we need to find out, and you need to find out, what is it that God made you brilliant at? And we need to give you permission to soar with your strength. Imagine if every one of you in this room, right now at this stage of your life, was soaring with the strength God gave you, and you were bringing that strength to the table of your life in the community, in your family, in your home, in the church, whatever you do life, the place where you work, that you were already, and so I say the young people need to hear this, because the sooner you find out, the sooner we help you to even realize you're in the neighborhood of the things God made you brilliant at, the sooner you begin to track that, the sooner you can spend time doing what God made you brilliant at and doing more of that. If I asked you tonight, how intelligent are you on a scale of 1 to 10? I wonder what you would say. If you were to score yourself, not the person next to you, if you were to score yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on how intelligent you are, where would you score yourself? Will there be any 10s in the room? If there's a 10 in the room, you should come up here and I will sit down there, because you should be talking to all of us. Or if I was to say, score yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of creativity, would you put yourself high or in the middle or low? Think about it. Because what I want to say to you about that question is this: the score that you give yourself doesn't matter. What matters is what my question made you think about. Because the way you assess intelligence and assess creativity is what I'm after. Because when I mention how intelligent are you, some of you, most of us in this room, define that by our education, the letters we have after our name, whether we have degrees or qualifications that say how intelligent we are, because we think of intelligence as a cerebral, mental thing. When I mentioned creativity, how creative are you? You probably thought, well, I'm not into the arts. I'm not especially gifted like the creative people maybe on stage. I don't do portraits. I don't perform. I'm not a painter or a sculptor. And so your definition of creative went down that route. So you give yourself a low score because you don't think you're a creative person. And that's my point. My point is every single one of us in this room are creative. You were born creative because creativity is a core expression of your creator. Every person on the planet is creative, but we have hijacked the word creative and we have defined it by people that perform, the performing arts, painters, sculptors, and so on. We've said that's creative people, and so you believe that you are on a low score in creativity because you think about it wrongly. And the question, therefore, is not how intelligent are you or how creative are you. The question is, how are you intelligent? How are you creative? Not how creative you are, but in what way are you creative? And when you begin to answer the question that way, your score changes radically. And you realize that it's impossible to score when your definition becomes as wide as I just made it. How, in what way are you intelligent? Ken Robinson, one of the great leaders, thought leaders in this revolution in education, says this, that there are two worlds. There are two worlds we're all involved in. There's the world that existed before you arrived, that will be here after you're gone. And there is the world that only exists because you exist. There is the world that you brought with you to this world when you were born. The reason God sent you here. That world that is inside you is the world that does not exist unless what's inside you comes out. And what's inside you will not come out if we make you as a rabbit keep swimming and jumping off cliffs. In other words, we don't enable you to flourish, and human flourishing surely is far more important to the survival and the prosperity of this planet than the flourishing of natural resources. Every generation that has made a huge difference in its generation has been down to people that flourished internally outward. People that that had major inventions and breakthroughs in all walks of life, in science and in medicine and in technology, when you track who was at the roots of that revolution in those areas, it was individuals that knew they were on the planet to do one thing, to make one discovery, one invention, and those breakthroughs we now all are the beneficiaries of, and we track it back to people that we quote on screen in the offering tonight. And we're indebted to these people who in their generation did whatever they could. They were not rich, they were not prosperous, no one recognized this strength in them. Maybe they were not celebrated till years and years after, and they were dead. But they left a legacy in our world because they realized they were here as a rabbit to run and get out what God had put in them, and it made a difference not to their generation, but everyone ever since, including ours tonight. What is it that God made you good at? There's a world that did not exist until you existed. There's something God sent you here to the planet for. There's something God sent you here to bring. And it's your getting that out of you that adds your world to this world and improves the world that we live in. But if we teach you to live your life narrow and small and afraid and living inside the permissions of other people, and been defined by labels other people place on you, then you will live your life and you will never flourish as a human being, and you will add to the crisis of human flourishing that I'm talking about tonight. But this inner world of your inner consciousness, your inner passions and talents and interests and hopes and dreams, that's the stuff that is going to make this church and our church and every church in the world and every community in which those churches live. It is that development and the discovery of that internal treasury that often stays locked up, and a small piece of it is handed over. Imagine if we could explore and explode and unearth all that human resource God has put inside your life and mine and get it out of us and bring to the planet the world that didn't exist until you existed. I wish as a parent I'd known this earlier than the late 90s, because by this time 3 of my children had finished going through school. My 4 daughters were different academically. I have 2 of them that went to university and got degrees. I have one that became a pediatric nurse, and my youngest daughter Esther was not brilliant at school. In fact, she hated school. And in the late 90s, when she was getting to the back end of her schooling, it was just such hard work getting her to go to school every day. And of course, she brought her homework home, and some of you parents will relate to this, that I used to say to her, well, what mark did I get for that essay? Because I finished doing the homework, not her. We would sit down together to do the homework, and as the night developed, she would slide off the couch, off the table, onto the couch, pick up the remote control, start watching TV, and I'm still over here answering the maths questions. There's something wrong with this picture. But it had to be in by tomorrow morning. And we had to get it finished or she'd be in trouble. And she didn't like school anyway, never mind going with work undone to school. So for years we did that. And so I read this book by the late 90s that I'm talking to you from a little bit earlier tonight. And I remember going to the parent-teachers evening. Now the parent-teachers evenings, I don't know about here in Singapore, what happens is you spend all the evening with the teachers in whose subjects your kids are not doing well. The subjects where your kids are doing well, they don't want to see you. They say, oh, no, she's doing fine, but Mr. So-and-so wants to see you in maths. Then you spend all your night, the teacher telling you how stupid your child is and how concerned they are about their ability to qualify on anything. Well, I went to this parent-teachers evening, and I was pushed through all the teachers, none of which were really she was doing great in. But the one that wanted to see me was Mrs. Dawson in history. Mrs. Dawson sat me down. She said, Mr. Scanlon, I'm so glad we've got 20 minutes with you, because I want you to know I'm very concerned about Esther, because I'm going to tell you now she's going to completely fail a history exam in about 3 months' time. And we're very concerned, and so what we want to do is we want to give her extra homework, which I hear is my extra homework. Extra homework, I'm already maxed out with the homework I'm doing. And we wanted to stay behind at school, go into remedial flying. we'll get an extra tuition, and we think between now and the exam, if we'll do that together with your cooperation, we might get Esther through the exam. She's not going to get an A or a B, but at least she'll get some decent grade, you know, around, you know, C or D or F or G. If we have this 3-month kind of plan, you know. So what do you think? Well, I'd read this book by now, and I'm off in my mind on this thing. So I said, okay, Mrs. Dawson, can we have a real conversation? She said, absolutely. That's why I hoped we'd get down to this tonight. I said, okay. I said, let me just say a couple of things to you. Number one, has it occurred to you history isn't that important to everybody else on the planet? Yes. Yes. She said, Mr. Scanlon, what are you saying? I said, well, I know you love history, and that's great. You chose to study it, probably did a degree in it. I said, that's great. But you know, not everybody loves history. You know, what I wanted to say to her is God didn't make everybody good at history, and that's okay. So she didn't get that, it didn't compute at all. So I said, let's just be real. I said, history is all about memorization, isn't it, of dates. You know, what year was the Battle of Hastings? What year did King Harold get the Norman arrow in his eye during, this is how much history I know, during the Norman invasion, when everybody called Norman invaded England? I added that bit in case you're thinking, I didn't hear that bit of history. What year was that? I said, isn't that, you know, who was the third wife of Henry VIII, and why did he cut her head off? And I said, isn't that history? She said, absolutely. And that's the problem, she said. I said, of course it is. I said, Esther can't remember where her shoes are. And she cares about her shoes. So if she can't remember where things are she cares about, how would she remember what year the Battle of Hastings was that she doesn't care about? And so let me ask you a question. If she knew all those dates in history, how would that help her in life? How many days in her future life do you think she'll need to know that? How many days will she say to herself, I am so glad I know what year the Battle of Hastings was. I've used it 15 times today. If I didn't know that, I wouldn't have got the job that I've got. I don't think so. She said, Mr. Scanlon, I have never heard a parent speak to me this way before. I said, I know. I wish I'd spoken to teachers before about this and this way, but I was too slow to learn what I've learned recently, which is my daughter, and I'd read this book, she didn't know what I'm talking about. She thought I was on drugs. I said, my daughter is a rabbit, and rabbits don't swim. She looked at me like, what? What? Whatever. I said, so we're not going to do extra homework. Don't send it home. We're not going to do it. I said, Mrs. Dawson, Esther, you and me both know Esther is going to fail history, and I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. She said, what do you mean you don't care? I said, I don't care. She said, because what you don't know, and what this school doesn't know, and what this school doesn't care about, is that Esther is brilliant with children. But there's nothing in the school curriculum that allows her to express that. So instead, you make her feel bad because she can't remember what date King Harold got the arrow in the eye. You make her feel bad for not knowing that, but you don't make her feel good for what she's brilliant at. In other words, being good with children was her awesome forehand. Being poor at history was her weak backhand. So the school want to make her spend time on what she's not good at and never will be. You can improve a weakness, but it's never going to be a strength. But I said, you don't celebrate what she's great at. I said, you know, my daughter's brilliant with kids, and she was. And it was a natural God-given thing that she was brilliant with kids. I only knew that because if you had a screaming baby, and even the mother couldn't settle the child, if you gave the screaming baby to Esther, it would go into a coma. I believe that's a gift, and I believe some of you would pay for that gift. Well, I left the school that night and I went home and I said to Esther, I saw Mrs. Dawson. She said, oh no, what did she say? I said, she's saying we need extra homework. You're going to have to stay after school and have, been remedial history class and so on and so on. She said, what did you say? I said, I told her we're not going to do that. I said, I told her you're going to fail history and I don't care. She said, Dad, you never said that. I said, yes, I did. She said, oh my gosh. Oh, we're in such trouble. We're in trouble now. I said, no, you have parental support and parental permission to fail history. all the young people are like, yes! The parents are like, whatever. Are we done yet? Well, 3 months later, Esther failed history. And maths. And science. Need I go on? She left school, failed her exams. And the kids that passed their exams and had further education options, she didn't have anymore. Our kids can be cruel and text things to other kids. And she's like a bit concerned and a bit down because she doesn't know what she's going to do now for a job. And she's going to have a low-paid job and maybe manual laboring job. And wasn't sure that that's really what she wanted to do either. And she loved kids, but she said to me, but Dad, I need to pass exams to work with kids. How am I going to work with kids? I said, I don't know. And she was my little guinea pig experiment because I didn't know whether or not this thing was going to work. She was my little experiment. I didn't tell her that, but she was my experiment. I thought, I've stood up to the teacher. I've protected you from the teacher, the education system that wants to make you swim as a rabbit. I told them to back off. And then you failed history and you proved me right. And now we're here. You failed your exams. You're sitting at home. And about a month or two after she finished school, we can get the band back up here, by the way. Gives people hope we finish when you say that. I think I'd like to flourish, but you're killing me. Get the band back up here, thank you. She came running to me at the end of a service, a Sunday morning service, tears streaming down her face with a big pile of money in her hand. I said, what's happened? What's happened? She said, you'll never believe what's happened. I said, what's happened? Where did you get the money from? She said, I got a job. So many you got a job? It's a Sunday service. She said, I know, but I got a job. And at that time, Bradford City, our city's football team, were in the Premier League in our country. I know. We didn't stay there long. It's easier to get there than it is to stay there. So our team was signing up some of the top players in the country, and one of the players that our club signed was a Christian, heard about our church, and decided to attend our church. I didn't know this. This family had come and moved in a village near to us and had come to the church, and they needed a nanny. His wife was expecting their second child in a few months' time, and they needed a nanny desperately. And on the grapevine of the church, they found out that our daughter, Esther, was brilliant with children. And this footballer found her in the crowd. And he said to her, I hear you're great with children. She said, yeah, I love working with kids. He said, I'd like to offer you a job. Can you start tomorrow? He said, can you drive? She said, I can't drive. I'm saving up for lessons, but it's very expensive. But I'm saving up. He said, I need you to be able to drive. So he said, here. And he gave her $1,000. Sing dollars. Give it $1,000. That was the money in her hand, this money, to get driving lessons. He said, here's this money, get driving lessons. When that runs out, I'll give you more because I need you to be able to drive to work for me. So take that, get driving lessons. He said, and then you can start tomorrow morning. They lived in the next village, so she could walk to work or I could drop her off at work. And that was kind of, 13, 14 years ago. She still works with kids today. She's soaring still with her strength, with children. I said, and when she told me he gave me this money for driving lessons and he gave me a job and he said, I want you to work for us. I've heard you're brilliant with children. And she's got tears streaming down her face. I said, whoa, hang on, Esther. She said, what? I said, but you failed history. I couldn't resist it. Didn't he say to you, But before I give you this job, did you pass history? Before I entrust my children to you, do you know what year the Battle of Hastings was? You never asked her that. And all of her life, I believe that she could have been, like some of you have been, defined by what God didn't make you good at in the first place. You are like a rabbit that is being defined by your ability to fly or swim. And my message to you tonight is that in order for you to flourish, you sometimes even have to realize that the education system is rigged against you flourishing. And the gift of parents to our children is what my gift was to my last daughter going through school. It is giving them permission to flourish and to thrive in the way that God made them to be. That as parents, we want our kids to do well, but doing well is not defined by what society tells us it's defined by. I have met so many people around the world who after they've heard me speak this way have come to me saying, I just feel I'm so trapped in this job and this career that I never wanted in the first place. A young girl came to me in our church and she said, I listened to what you said today and I hate what I do. I drag myself out of bed every morning to go to college. She said, and I can't do it anymore. And she was in our city from Nigeria and she was studying management. Her father had paid for her to study in management. He wanted her to go back to Nigeria and work in the family business, which I know is a common thing in this part of the world too. And I know it's a tradition often for the kids to carry on in the family business. But we've got to hold on a minute. Say, is that what God gifted them to do? Or are we bringing through a generation who are going to live frustrated because they are like a rabbit in water by being asked to do something that is not how God wired them? Maybe how God wired you, but not how God wired them. And therefore they do not flourish as a person. And she wasn't. And I said to her, well, I know you're upset about that management course, but let me ask you a question. What do you love to do? And her eyes lit up. She said, I love working with children. She said, every Sunday I come here and I work in kids church and I think I've died and gone to heaven. I wish I could do that all week. She said, I love working with the kids. I said, what do you want to do? She said, I want to be a teacher. I'd love to be a teacher. I said, how old are you? She said, I'm 22. I said, you need to write to your dad immediately and tell him what you've told me. Quote my name if it will help. And let him know that this is killing you. And you love him and you appreciate his support. But what you really want to do is to be a teacher. Because I said, if you don't change it now, 10 years from now when you're 32, married with a couple of kids maybe, and you're in management with your dad, you will be miserable. You may be ill, and these doctors from Malaysia will tell you. A lot of the people that they see in their surgeries have physical symptoms, but it is not a physical issue. But it is caused by stress and worry, and it is caused by people trying to live a life that they were not built to live. It is caused by people every day doing something they hate instead of doing what they love, and it manifests itself in stress and sleeplessness and prescription medicine dependent. And many doctors around the world and in this room know that many people that come to see you week in, week out, you know for a fact that what you're prescribing won't make any difference. Because the issue is an internal lack of flourishing, not an external symptom that we throw medication at. And I said to this young girl, you will be sick and you will be deeply unhappy in your 30s when there's something in your 20s you knew you should have changed. I said, this is not going to be easy, and your dad may hate you and disown you, and all of us too. But I promise you, you will be grateful we had this conversation years from now if you'll make the change. I don't know what she did. She never came back and fed back to me. I don't know what she did. But I hope she found the courage to make that switch. You know, all across this room tonight, I don't know where this lands in your world, but I pray that you will have the courage at least to start a conversation, at least to realize that this is what God may be good at. And I wonder if I could find space. I wonder if people would give me room to flourish in the very thing that I automatically flourish in. I just want to become better at what God made me good at. You know, it may not have a name or a label. It doesn't need that. It may just be an inkling, a leaning, a passion, an effortless strength that you have, an ability, an empathy, just something in you that when people talk about you and people describe you, they always mention that thing about you. They're referring to what makes you outstanding. And you've never seen it as something that people will pay you for. And trust me, they will. You know, all across the world, people are leaving their careers 20, 30 years in, realizing their career was never what they were on the planet to do. And before they die, they want to spend a period of their life doing what God made them good at. It's harder to change the longer you leave it. That's why I want the young people especially to listen up tonight. And hey, if God made you brilliant at maths and science and history, yes, fantastic. But that doesn't mean you're more intelligent than the person next to you who's hopeless at history and hopeless at maths, but they're brilliant with their hands. Or they're awesome with food. Or they're brilliant in other expressions of creativity different to yours. It's not one's right and one's wrong. It's just God made us all different. And good leaders and good parents and good teachers do not have a one-size-fits-all towards people. That's killing us all over the world. And good pastors in the church do not have a one-size-fits-all towards people either. When I got saved, I was told this is how you pray. I was told you have to get up early in the morning to pray. Says who? Where's that in the Bible? Well, seek me early. Some obscure verse from, from Psalms, or I don't know what we got in the cool of the day, which was, I was told, was early in the morning. The early bird catches the worm, another Bible verse. Just testing. Well, I got up early to pray and fell asleep every morning. Because I had 3 kids by the time I was 20. I know. And so I'm up all night with the kids. And then I've got a job in a warehouse. I'm starting early in the morning. It's very physical, so I'm exhausted. So I'm getting up at 6 a.m. to pray because I'm told that's what you do. And I fell asleep and got late for work. And then I'm dealing with another issue. I'm now dealing with guilt and condemnation that I'm not as spiritual as the people who all are getting up and praying on a morning. As far as I knew, that's what we do. That's how God expects us to be. So I was told. No one said to me, which they should have said to me, no one said to me, hey, figure out, are you better in the morning or better at night? Are you an AM or PM person? If you're a PM person, then pray and read your Bible and have that quiet time we used to call it. There was no such thing in my house. It was a riot from morning till night. But have your devotional life whenever it suits your personality. No one told me that. I felt bad that I couldn't pray early in the morning. And so I'm now struggling with all of that. Because people are a one-size-fits-all approach to how we're supposed to have a devotional life. Your devotional life will look like whatever you want it to. Whatever works for you is cool. And if you sat next to people that get up at 5 in the morning and pray and glow in the dark with the anointings on them, and have angels river dancing on the duvet 3 nights a week, and just seem to float through life, these super saints, they're the people you're hanging around. Change your company. Get around some normal people who fall asleep and can't pray in the morning. But they're wide awake at midnight. Yeah, pray then. Find out how God made you. Be true to yourself. Amen? Let's give each other permission to flourish. Let's not make people be something God didn't make them to be. Amen? Come on, let's stand together in the house tonight. Come on, we're going to sing that song, the last song that we sang. I'm going to sing that a couple of times, and then we're going to invite people to come to know Christ tonight. Come on.